So welcome to all who are here and to Mark. My name is Paul Meyer. I'm the editor of Acres USA magazine, and glad you could join us for this webinar today. This webinar is partially sponsored by the USDA TOP program, TOPP, Transitioning to Organic Partnership Program. So thanks to them for that. And today's webinar is with Mark Shepard, who is a restoration agriculture developer. He has run Forest Agriculture Nursery, forestag.com, and he's a consultant, and he writes monthly for Acres USA magazine, columns on ecological principles of agriculture, and that is going to be the topic of his presentation today. So the format is we've got about 20 to 30 minutes of presentation that Mark will do, and then there'll be some time for Q&A after that. So if you have questions, please drop them into the Q&A box down below. You can see that. I think the chat is probably disabled for all of you, but the Q&A box is there, and I will jump back in later to help moderate the Q&A. So with that, I will hand it over to Mark.
All righty. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for inviting me to do this. So what today is going to be, it's a miniaturized version of my all-day presentation that will be at the Eco Ag Conference in Madison, Wisconsin, first week of December. If you haven't signed up for that, be sure to go there. And since I only have 20 minutes, this is going to be like the speed round. So strap in, hold on to your hat. If you haven't gone to the bathroom yet, you're going to miss half the show. So anyways, here we go. And now it's not advancing for me. What the heck? That's not what I want. Oh, Paul, there we go. It did something. All right, let's see what happens. All right, wrote a book, Restoration Agriculture, available at Acres USA. Ecological succession is a change in plant and animal communities over time as that site experiences the weather, the day-to-day of that place. Every place on the planet goes through ecological succession. Every place looks different because of the different forces, climatological, soil types, water regimes in place. But by understanding how succession works in your area, we can turn something like this into this. We can turn something like this into this. These are all real projects that I've worked on. We can turn that up above into that down below. And the whole point with the restoration agriculture, we're told so many times, oh, we can't do ecological restoration because that will take out, land out of food production. It's like, no. We're going to keep land in food production and recreate the ecosystem that was there with food as the profitable byproduct. These are photographs from New Forest Farm in Wisconsin. And I can't see what that caption says. With profitable, productive agriculture as the byproduct. People like to use the word co-product. I'm using byproduct because just by redeveloping the ecosystem, all these products are spun off as a natural part of it. And part of it is soil building, incredible fertility of the soil. And now this won't let me advance again. That's fascinating. Okay, there we go. Now, what we have here, this is just a quick little graphic. It's, obviously it'll be different in Arizona than it is in Maine, than it is in Mexico or Africa. But we have a process of having something started from disturbed site or, volcanic eruption left dirt behind, or the glaciers went by and left a sheer rock, solid rock. Vegetation grows and changes through time. And the time scale on this is different everywhere as well. And so what instead of going in and erasing all this to grow our crops like corn and beans, etc., we're in the process of creating a new type of agriculture and a new society that goes along with it, where we participate in the process of the plant communities and animal communities changing through time. And at every stage along this continuum, including up at the far right here, when this whole system gets wiped out and starts over again, we can participate in this system and we can grow our own food and have a wonderful economy in the meantime. The steps that we go through is we identify our biome, its plant community types. We construct earthworks to manage the water resource. Doesn't matter what nutrient deficiencies you have in the soil or surpluses. Without water, we really can't grow plants. So there are obviously drier places on this planet where water conservation and concentration is more important. There's very wet places on this planet that either we go into aquatic systems, which we're not going to talk about today, or we direct the water somewhere else. We'll establish perennial polycultures that more mimic nature than horticulture or orchards. And then we use the agroforestry techniques. We'll address that a little bit today. Then the whole entire design of our property will now be designed around the water management system. How we interact with it, how we move around, how materials move, energies move, is all shaped after the water management pattern. And then we're going to manage the system, not necessarily by following the techniques that the university tells us that we have to have an orchard or whatever. We're going to manage our systems more according to how the natural system would be managed with episodic disturbance according to our location. Obviously, those books are available, Acres USA. Now, before we get started, I just want to make it really clear here. Farming is not a high profitable enterprise. The farming activity, growing things, raising livestock and selling it, is not where the money is. If you're gonna go to a workshop or learn from folks on how to make a manure pile of money out of farming, go for it. I don't need to talk to you because you're hallucinating. It doesn't matter whose statistics you look at. Farming doesn't pay very well at all. However, real estate does. So if you look at farming and you want it to pay for the real estate, you're in trouble because in most cases, and it has been since the 1970s and 1980s, real estate prices are no longer attached to the productivity of the land. This was a big pet peeve of Charles Walters, founder of Acres, way back in the 70s and 80s, is that real estate prices are no longer connected to how productive it is agriculturally. Since real estate now is more speculatively driven, you'll hear people saying, oh, real estate's so expensive, people can't access it. That's because they're looking at the real estate through the lens of the farming activity, trying to pay for it, and that's a losing proposition. We're talking about investing in the real estate. Now, let's use agriculture to make our real estate way more valuable than the quadrupled in 10 years. It's just a different way to look at the numbers. And when you look at the numbers from the real estate perspective, all of a sudden the farming works, and the farming works really well economically. Another thing that we're going to look at, if we look at here, the red line is just the general real estate trends. So the real estate's going to make us some money. Well, then everywhere on this continent and in most continents, there are trees that grow. And the dominant, most valuable timber in that area, if you look at that graph right there, that's where the big money is. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be buying real estate, restoring an ecosystem with a component of the system being the most valuable woody crop of that place. It may not even come due in our lifetime, but we can still economically profit from that, as we'll talk a little bit about later. So if you now add this line to this line, the farming isn't even on this chart, for crying out loud. This is where the value is. Let's restore the ecosystem. We're banking in Southwest Wisconsin approximately $77,500 an acre 40 years from now on red oak timber. And when you cut the red oak timber down, it sprouts back anyways, and so you always have it. And if I plant a complete full system underneath it with chestnuts, hazelnuts, apples, raspberries, currants, livestock, fungi, if I plant that system around all the oaks, I cut the oaks down, all of that's still there. So the farming is still taking place, and the oaks are growing, being coppiced and regrowing, coppiced, being regrown and coppiced. How we get value today, if we want, is we can borrow against the net present value, which is the discounted value of that $77,400 by the number of years between now and the harvest date of that timber. Then agriculture is the profitable byproduct of that. And the agriculture, farming, is what adds the value to the real estate. and takes care of the real estate for us. What kind of land will give you a greater return for a value-added investment? A picture-perfect property with buildings and nice repair and trim fences and water over pasture, rich soils, regionally appropriate mix of open and forested land. Will that bring you the biggest return, the biggest value add? Or a derelict, eroded piece of crap land with lousy soils? If you get a eroded, derelict piece of crap land with lousy soils, and then you create a farm with all these incredible buildings and nice fences and watered every paddock, rich soils and all that kind of stuff, you've made a huge value added gain in the real estate, and the money is in the real estate, not in the farming. Which piece of land will be less expensive to buy? So your best value for the best gain over time is a piece of crap piece of real estate. And one of the interesting things about the separation between the real estate values and the productivity of the land, way back in 1980, Greg Judy was considered somewhat of a visionary, and he realized that I don't want to be in the real estate business. I want to be in the livestock business. And so how do I raise livestock without land? Well, there's people who have land and they need land to be taken care of for them. So he would have people either let him graze for free, or they would pay him a nominal amount to graze. I work with some folks in California that they have to pay like $20,000 a year for somebody to come in and graze their grass. It's like the money's not in the farming enterprise. The farming enterprise is never going to pay for land in California or Pennsylvania, New Jersey, et cetera. So when we go get this land that we're going to fix up, we're going to find things, everything from, mined lands, fire damage, clear cuts, cropland, pasture, abandoned early succession. So it's like shrubby brush overgrowing the land. It could be like forestry plantations. It could be plantations or forests that had been thinned. Could be mid-succession forest that's grown halfway. It was clear cut maybe 50 years ago. Cut over timber where there's some trees remaining behind and there's lots of openings, or we can get mature forest. These are all different phases of disturbance in an ecosystem, and we have a response to each one of those. We're going to farm differently depending on what kind of land it is that we get. And we're going to target a specific appearance to this particular land, because what we want to do is we want to increase the surface area exposed to the sun, because with more surface area exposed to the sun, we have more photosynthesis going on. And if you look at these charts here, the net primary productivity is the amount of photosynthate that accumulates in storehouses on a piece of property. You take the total photosynthesis in minus the respiratory needs of the plants and animals in that system, and then there's a net return at the end of the season, every single season. And I just want to point out over here that temperate evergreen forest, as far as I know, most everybody on this webinar is in a temperate zone. So temperate forests, savannas, temperate deciduous forests, boreal forest even, woodland and shrubland, every single one of those plant community types have greater net productivity than cultivated land. So why the heck would you want to learn how to grow more corn and better corn when if you just planted something totally different like a savanna, you're now dealing with like twice the total photosynthesis almost available to you. We've got a little bit of slop to work with there. And what will sell for more money? This beautiful savanna farm that looks like a golf course almost, that you've fixed up all the fences and the buildings, et cetera, or a piece of bare black dirt that you've farmed to death using corn for year after year after year. First, we need to do a little research, no matter where you live. If you're not on this map, I apologize. You can find the information wherever you are for all around the world. Different plants grow in different regions, and they grow there without any human care whatsoever. They survive all of the floods, droughts, high temperatures, low temperatures, windstorms, ice storms that place can throw at it, and those plant community types still persist. So we're going to mimic those with our farm designs, and we're going to cherry pick the ones that produce food, fuels, medicines, fibers, forage for livestock, et cetera, things that can be culinary, medicinal, et cetera. And if we're going to be in a region like over here, you see all this. It's a similar plant community types will be found in this region here. When I plant the farm, if I'm over here, this is Colorado, I'm going to plant things from the farthest south part of that region, the farthest north part of the region, the east, the west. I'm going to plant varieties from the wetter areas, the drier areas, and mix them all together on my property because I want the genetic resources that then can sort themselves out through time. And we will be breeding the plants and the animals that are even more adapted to our place through time. This is just an example of some of the edibles that you can find in a pine system, pine nuts. And, you know, look where you are. There's sugar pines, Italian pines, digger pines, coulter pines, Siberian pine, Korean pine, on and on. And all these other plants grow with it, and grass grows all around. So you've always got the livestock thrown in the mix. And then the place where I'm located right here in Southwest Wisconsin, this is the plant community type that's the most widespread anyways. And I think it has the most agricultural applications is the oak savanna. Overstory of oak, chestnut, or beech. I focus heavily on chestnut here. Apples is an understory. They were formerly wild, you know, crabs and whatnot. Hazelnut is a shrub understory. The wetter zone hazelnut shrubs would be beaked hazel and an American hazel. Then we could do the prunuses, plums, cherries, peach, apricots, nectarines, all that. And then, of course, we've got currants and gooseberries growing in the shade. We've got grapes climbing all over the whole tangle, fungi, forage, animals. Everything in here is edible. These are plants that have been adapted to here for 95 million years or 6,000 years, depending on what reference material you're looking at. They have been able to survive without us. We can help them out a little bit. So mimic our plant community types. Now we're going to manage the water resource. This New Forest Farm again. The water used to do this before all these patterns that you see on the farm. These are all water movement channels and ponds all over the place. It used to be massive flash flood, 1.5 inches of rain on this ground, and there's overland water flow because it's a heavier clay soil. And the water coming off of the farm fields next to me is just extreme. We had rivers running down the property last night because of rain on saturated ground. And then after we do the patterning that's described in Water for Any Farm and the engineering field manual, these are the patterns that you see, and that's where the water goes. My rule of thumb is on this property, I don't want any property to leave overland. I want it to soak in, come out as springs, or leave in the body of an animal when the animal goes to slaughter. I put these two little arrows there just to let you know that this doesn't have to only be a passive system. If we want to put gates strategically and siphon pipes strategically located through the system, this can be a passive pulse flow irrigation system when it rains, and an active irrigation system and a livestock watering system. If we have gates to control the flow of water when we need it to go to certain places, we can steer it in all the different channels. The whole system is set up by gravity. It's described in the 2 books right there. Now, here's some of the lands that we have available to us. You know, mined land, fire damage, clear cuts, cropland, pastured, abandoned plantations, thin forest. This is a fella down in eastern Kentucky, western West Virginia. He bought a whole bunch of strip mine. What they had done is they stripped off the top of the mountain, and then they took all of the mixed debris that it was coal. It didn't have enough valuable coal in it, so they buried it in the next valley over. And then they took clean soil and they sealed the whole thing off with clean soil. And the real estate prices for strip mines, they were like $150 an acre. So he got like a couple thousand acres. And you're basically starting, it's like a plowed field. There's nothing there, hardly any mineral nutrition in it, no organic matter. It's compacted as heck. What a great place to start. And if you're starting at $150 an acre, the sky's the limit on your capital gains. I know people who've bought places that have just burned out. Look at the American West right now, and actually look at New Jersey. There's a lot of real estate available right now that's just had the crap burned out of it, and that's a great way to pick up some cheap real estate and have a real ecological turnaround. And then, of course, there's farmland, and the farmland is going to be different in different places. This property here in Wisconsin was abandoned farmland because it was the edge of the shoulders of the ridges is flat land up top, and then steep slopes, and then flat valley bottoms. And the steep slopes were all eroded. There were huge erosion gullies here. They couldn't get any more yields out of it. Their tractors are too big and, you know, at risk of tipping over. So it was available for cheap. Other places, forget it. You know, agricultural land has insane prices on it, and it's, in my opinion, is not worth picking up. There's other places that have been flooded, and as you can see here, that these trees, they're okay, they survive it. All of the coastal areas have plant communities that are adapted to periodic inundation. How do you like that? I haven't used inundation in a while. So let's, instead of growing corn or beans there and then getting our government check when we flood out, because we know it's going to flood out, why don't we plant, you know, hardwood bottoms with various different other woody plants that are growing in? How about, you know, pecans and mockernut hickories and pawpaws and persimmon and so on and so on. And let's plant trees, not like a berry bush or 3 in your front yard. We're talking tens of thousands of trees to cover many, 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 many acres. We're planting smaller trees. We're planting them mechanically. I'm going to skip over the video, but you can see at this rate right here, we've got two guys feeding the trees to the sticker, and the guy is putting them in the ground. He's just concentrating on his job. The other guys are putting in a particular pattern, 2 of this, 1 of that, 2 of this, 1 of that, so we can plant polycultures as we go, 10,000 stems a day plus. Go to the next slide, please. Go to the next slide. There we go. So if we have a situation where we have, you know, strip mine land or ag land, we go plant right into it. We start doing alley cropping. This is flooded, reclaimed flooded land. This is over in the UK. Plant a row of trees and grow your row crops in between. This is wheat. This is the same operation. They're growing their grain crops in between rows of trees. And over time, as the trees start to produce, they can now plant more trees, more rows of trees, because it's more profitable than the grains that it's replacing. I got my start buying clear cuts because they were super cheap. You know, who wants to live in a clear cut? It's ugly as heck. Well, they've cleared the land for you. It's pretty easy. Now let's do a similar thing. Let's start planting trees in a clear cut. Or you can get stuff that's maybe a few years after clear cut, and you got new regrowth coming back. It's just different stages of regrowth and different species that are in there. This one is mostly beech, the foliage here. You want to pay attention to what species you have. Save the ones that have more value to your operation. And in my case here, this is actually one of my properties up in Maine, long time ago. Is that I saved all the oak and all the beech because I want to have nuts falling for pigs and cattle later on. And of course, I planted a whole bunch of other things, you know, butternuts and hickories and walnuts and so on. And you also want to find the trees. You see a couple of oak trees here. These are doing okay. They're nice, but for some reason, this oak is just growing straight and tall really fast. We want to make sure that we save the best, most vigorous for 1, or the most productive of fruits and nuts for 2. And let's go in there and let's clean this up a little bit. Let's chip it. But instead of just, you know, calling in somebody with a forestry mulcher for $1,700 a day to chip the place, let's get a orchard mower, flail chopper with heavy duty flails. Let's go ahead and flail it ourselves, but inoculate it with mushroom spawn before we do the chipping. We'll have rows of trees are the ones that we decided to save. And then we go ahead and we chip in between. You see all the trees that are chipped on the ground there. And then pretty soon we have culinary mushrooms going. We have our first sale of some type of product within a year. And of course, we'll want to do our soil amendment, do good agricultural practices everywhere, and, you know, interact with the ecology of the place as it is. So chestnut trees are one of my go-tos in most places in the U.S. where I operate. And these are all different pictures of different projects of mine. Sometimes big windstorms go through and you can get a lot of, you know, affordable real estate where the wind has gone in and knocked stuff down. Well, when you have situations like that, once again, let's go in and let's clear it out a little bit. This is a messy tangle. This little spot in particular, most of the trees that we see here are going to die because they've crowded each other out. They've used all the resources on the site. However, underneath, you can see there's some beech and chestnuts that have sprouted in the shade. those will eventually dominate the site, 100 years from now. Since we know that this shade tolerant regeneration has already occurred, let's go in here, remove some of the biomass. We have firewood sales, we have logs for making mushrooms. We let in some more light, we get some grass seed down there, we start growing grass. This is an example right here of doing exactly that. The larger diameter material, none of it's huge, so there's no like sales for pulp or saw logs on a situation like that. But this is cheap land if you want to pick it up. Just brushy, nasty kind of stuff. There's a project in New Jersey that I just worked on a couple weeks ago. That's like 99% horrible invasive and vines and tangly stuff, greenbrier. It was absolute mess. Whereas you could go in there and you can either spend the money to have it all chipped down with a forestry mulcher, or go in and strategically remove the stuff and have some kind of yields for the labor. So in this case, firewood and mushroom logs. The place on the left has had one thinning, and mushrooms have been grown and firewood has come out of that. The place on the right has not had a thinning. So here, if you look at the place on the right, say, oh my gosh, look at all the work, you're thinking with a different kinds of thought process than I want you to think about. Look at all the opportunities on the right. We go in there, we remove firewood, we remove mushroom logs, we get some grass growing. Now we can graze some animals in there. We have now upgraded that property, and now it's producing agricultural yields every single year. And here's one of the agricultural yields, one of my favorites, actually. I probably eat mushrooms every day. Not only do I inoculate some of the logs with mushrooms, after a while I said, well, I'm not happy inoculating little logs or totems with mushrooms. So I started inoculating the stumps of the trees that I cut down that I don't want to come back. So we'll consume that stump with edible mushrooms. Those are oyster mushrooms. And then nowadays, I just inoculate whole entire trees. Drop a tree at the right time of year, inoculate it. So the same amount of spawn that would inoculate a 2-foot long totem will inoculate a 40-foot long tree. And literally, this one, you see all these mushrooms on the ground. We had already harvested a batch off of here. This one log, we got over 125 pounds of mushroom on one log. And there were literally dozens of these logs that had mushrooms on them that we had inoculated. If you can't sell all those mushrooms, if you can't eat all those mushrooms, we know who will eat those mushrooms. Mushrooms are protein. You turn wood into protein. It's amazing. Incredible pig food. Pigs love it. So let's do a silvopasture system in one of these reclaimed, brushlands. Get in there, cut some firewood out, have some mushroom logs, get some grass established, move some pigs in, grow some bacon. This is if you have lots of seed producing trees. These trees are not quite at logging size, so there's not a lot of money in that. That's nothing but expense for a landowner for the next 20 years, maybe. This site had been logged before, because you can see an old logging scar and the fact that this was a young tree when it was logged. So let's get some pigs in there. Let's benefit from the acorns that fall from the tree. This is from one of the rad consultants who lives down in Tennessee. You get cattle, have chickens. Probably the epic hero as far as grazing chickens in trees is Will Harris of White Oak Pastures down in Bluffton, Georgia. He has zillions of chickens that one of his strategies is, as they're coming out of pine plantation, is to move chickens in. This is my place. These are Taylor's cattle. He was grazing his cattle at my place. And this is a similar situation, is we're interacting with the shrubland as it matures. Long term, this will be red oak timber. More cows. You may be on the West Coast. You may be on the East Coast. What if you actually get mature timber? This is where we can kind of start to scratch our heads and ponder about the state of the world right now. If you had this property right here, there is a fortune in white pine timber, like, old, not old growth, but large second growth white pine timber. If you have a really well-developed forest duff that in its original timber, or like maybe early 1800s to middle 1800s when it regenerated, personally, man, I'd leave it alone. I mean, that's an amazingly precious resource. Especially if you're out in California and you got these, gigantic gonzo redwood trees. Well, you can have these redwoods, and there's also this little understory pine called sugar pine. Sugar pine has gigantic, it's the largest pine cones on the planet, and they're an edible pine nut pine. Well, maybe we could do some strategic thinning, favor the regeneration of our species of choice, which might be sugar pine, because it is a little bit of a threatened species because it's been over harvested. And why not start to make little gaps, so patch dynamics kind of cutting, and plant more sugar pines, knowing that long term the site's going to be dominated by redwoods. So open up a gap, plant some sugar pine, graze some animals, raise some berries. Once again, we're paying attention to our timber value and our real estate value at the same time. If you got a property like this, that's an extraordinarily valuable property, extraordinarily valuable property. Your best crop, if you wanted to keep it as a forest, an older, mature forest like that, is mushrooms. Just keep it in mushrooms. I would keep the large grazing animals out of it. You could, in some cases, if you're being overrun with invasive or thorny species, when you have a mature forest, you can put goats in there, and they're not going to damage your larger trees. So you can have goats in there periodically. But mushrooms are like a big money-making proposition. Now, this is just simple to show you that this is not just part of a strategy on one piece of land. We're talking about building a culture that, as a culture, we restore the ecosystems in front of us, and now we interact with it forever in perpetuity, and we mimic the natural disturbance regimes that particular area had forever since the dawn of time. So let's buy a clear cut or a burn or a mining site or whatever. It has no timber value, and the land value is terrible, and there's obviously no farm revenues. So let's plant it and start farming. Let's go alley cropping. But we're gonna start with 1/9 of it. So just look over here on the right, this pattern right here. Let's grow our crops in between and plant our trees. So for 20 years, we're gonna farm that place up on the upper left. Then 20 years from now, and we plant the whole thing. 20 years from now we have 40-year-old timber on everything. Now we're going to move the farming into this square here, into the new cut. We harvest the timber and we start over again. Then over here, the timber is now 60 years old. Let's go in here and farm that for 20 years. Whoops. Let's farm that for 20 years, and around and around and around we go. And notice I didn't touch the center. So just by doing this kind of interaction with the land, we are now promoting the growth of 160-year-old old growth timber for harvest, and the core of this whole system is never harvested. And every single successional stage is represented here, which has the maximum amount of habitat for the maximum number of species. All habitat types are represented there. And what's really amazing about it, I don't know if you guys, I mentioned Will already. If you haven't gone to workshops by Will Harris, White Oak Pastures, do that. This is one of their pathways to productivity that's a handout to all their different people and all the landowners that they work with. Doesn't matter what stage your land is at, there is a pathway to higher productivity that mimics the natural successional pathway, and it doesn't require all kinds of chemical inputs and insane machinery, and you can profit along the way. And so kudos to Will and what they do. He's one of the finest ecosystem managers that I know of. Now, the term regeneration, I want to, just clarify here with the ecological usage of the term regeneration. It's the process ensuring the development and successive generation of plants and populations of plants in a landscape. And they do that within the existing disturbance regime, whether it's hurricanes or volcanoes or floods, et cetera. And if a plant or animal community cannot reproduce itself and persist in the environment the way it is, then it's not regenerative. If you have a regenerative broccoli farm and a fire comes through and burns it to the ground, I'm willing to bet that broccoli doesn't sprout back again. That fails the ecological definition of regenerative. And that's fine. The certifiers have their own rules. That's different, but that's not the ecological definition of regenerative. This, however, is regenerative. This is in northern Italy. This had been occupied by people for almost 2,000 years. Mussolini cleaned the people out in World War II. It all grew back. It's everything from Italian pine to chestnut to walnut to olives, grapes. All of the perennial species continued to grow, and it's a who's who of edible crops. Italians, northern Italy Italians had been doing food forest, agroforestry for 2,000 years on that particular site. On your site, establish your perennial plant communities, mimicking your locally adapted ones. This is going into old pasture with our new mix of trees. Now it kind of grows up. It looks like a mess. Your orchard people are going to start to vomit, but this is incredibly productive. The cattle like it. We've got all kinds of fruits and nuts and berries represented in there. Now we're going to disturb it. We're going to cut things down, harvest our firewood, our food, our mushrooms. There's all the sticks laying on the ground. Let's get in there and we'll chip it up, let the grasses grow back underneath. We are now interacting with this ecosystem as it gradually matures. It gets larger and larger. And this is 20 years, probably 23 years when I took this picture. Once upon a cornfield at New Forest Farm is now a restored oak savanna, and it has produced economic returns of agricultural crops, has fed my family, sent 2 kids to college for the past 25 years. It is now a restored system, and it paid its own way. You can do the same in California, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico. It doesn't matter where you live. Let's restore the ecosystems of planet Earth using agriculture as the tool. That's all I have to say for today. How'd I do for time?
Perfect.
Nobody could hear me.
Great. Nope, that was perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Good.
Okay, got some great questions. All right. Advice on protecting tens of thousands of newly planted trees / seedlings. Fencing, do you fence along swales, tree lines, or let nature take its course? And then there was a related question. Can you talk about the best ways to protect young silvopasture plantings from livestock? Tree tubes, electric fence, something else? And at what stage of tree and shrub establishment can you scale back on that protection?
Those are actually 2 different questions, because if you're going to start a new system and plant all these trees, I would go ahead and plant way too many trees, way too close, and multiple rows of them, and include in there some very palatable trees like hybrid poplar and hybrid willows. I find more use out of the hybrid poplars than the hybrid willows. And then I'll relate it to like your garden. If you grow like 10 sweet corn plants, the raccoons come in and they take everything. If you plant a 10 by 10 patch of sweet corn, they'll take 90% of everything. If you plant a 10-acre patch of sweet corn, they get the outside 5 or 6 rows. You plant 1,000 acres, they get the outside 5 or 6 rows, and the majority of it's left behind. So scale matters. And if I'm going to be doing it, and if I have enough plants that are going in the ground, I won't be too concerned. I'll make sure that I'll also identify ahead of time where all the different deer trails are, and I'll plant especially abundant hybrid poplars and willows, different food plot plants along their current path right now. And so for the first few years, they don't realize that you've got some other stuff going on out in the middle of the field. And then by the time they realize it, it's too late. Fencing never really works. Repellents seem to work okay. The repellent that I've had the most success with is just eggs. You take a dozen eggs, you whip it up in 5 gallons of water, and you splash that or spray it on your trees. Of course, you have to do that after every rain. Now back to the livestock thing. If you've already done the water management system and now your trees are planted along that water management system, it's easy to put your fences to keep your livestock off the trees. Just use them on the inside of the trees, so the cattle are confined to the alley between rows of trees. I've also used tree tubes, which I don't really like. It's plastic junk. They deteriorate over time. And too many times I've had cattle either eat the tree tubes and it, messes with a cow. And then also they'll scratch on it, lean on it, and snap them off. The tree tubes also can bend and they can break your tree. So they're a nuisance, but they're useful. And if you're in a heavy deer pressure area, sometimes that's the best thing for you. I use them when I have them left over from a planting job that we do somewhere else for a client. And why I like tree tubes, I do the 5-foot tree tubes in most cases, is because if I don't get around to mowing or grazing in an area and the grass grows up tall, at least I know where the row of trees are. So I've got a new planting out here of chestnuts, like 2,500 chestnuts on like 5 acres. And every 30 feet, I put a tree tube to protect one chestnut tree. but it's more as a signal to me so I can see it. And if I'm mowing on either side, I don't mow all the chestnut trees that are in the row, because the trees are like 2 to 3 feet apart within the row. But every 30 feet, I put a tree tube. So tree tubes, fences, if you're doing an alley cropping situation, works pretty good. And all I
Great.
use for the fence is a portable electric fence. That's for the cattle. The deer, it's just 99% impossible to keep deer out. It just is. Get a dog, poach. I didn't recommend anybody poach. It's against the law. Don't do that. I've heard people do that. Egg spray as a repellent.
Great. Going back to the beginning here for the questions as they came in. So, are ecosystems shifting or expected to shift as climate change rolls out? And then how to plan for that, since I assume the answer is yes.
Yeah, actually, Nature Conservancy has done some of the best work that I've seen on the changes of ecosystems through time, because they're trying to do ecosystem restoration. They want to know how is it changing and where is it moving to. So, as a restoration agriculture farmer, rancher, grower, we participate in assisted migration. And how I mentioned when I was looking at the maps early on in the presentation, in your eco region, there'll be places down here that's maybe warmer and drier, maybe it's wetter over here within the range of the species in question. Say we're looking at a sugar pine slide here. If you're in the northern range of sugar pine, get all these different sugar pines from wherever you can and put them at your site. And then what you can also do is you can go and you say, well, maybe it's not suitable for Italian pine now. Italian pine is not even native to here, but the conditions are changing so that it will become more suitable for Italian pine. Or like in the case on the East Coast, where I've put a lot of species up in northeastern Maine, that they're native just a few hundred miles to the south, but it would take them 1,000 years to make it 300, 400 miles north. So I've gone ahead and I've planted them ahead of the climate change, and many of them die. You'll just have to expect that a lot of them will die, but the ones that survive obviously can survive there now. We just continue the process of bringing species from out of zone to that area. New Forest Farm here on the southwest corner of the property, that's where I have my more focused on the cold, hot, dry species. So I got a lot of material from high altitude, Colorado, New Mexico, et cetera. And then on the northeastern part of it, I've got the stuff from even further north and brought it south. So I've gotten south stuff and moved it north, and north stuff and moved it south. And whichever way the climate goes, at least we've got some genetic resources to go from there. So yes, we plan for that, and that's an interactive part of how we farm.
Great.
And grass. Grass is the #1 plant. It will live in almost every single environment on the planet, from the Arctic to the Antarctic. So grass is the backbone of this whole thing. And don't let anyone ever tell you that, oh, don't let the grass grow around your trees, it'll kill them. It's like, no. Trees and grass have been growing together for as long as there's been trees and grass. So grow grass.
And then a related question, where can we find the ecoregion map?
Oh, it's frustrating. Okay, it'd be really nice. You just do a Google search for it, or whatever search you like to do for it. What happens is they're being updated over and over and over again. Once upon a time, USDA had a lot of them. I go state by state, and then there's oftentimes, so the state may have the different, plant community types in your particular area. Nonprofit organizations that are doing conservation work can have them. And the different plant community types are called different things. Foresters would call them forest types. Plant community types is another word. Eco types, and of course I'm missing like 5 or 6 other ones. So keep looking until you find those maps, and don't just settle for one. Look at a lot of them, because if we went out, we collected data to do this particular set of maps, and then a different group goes out and collects data to make a different set of maps, they're different maps. And so you want to kind of have a whole bunch of those. But USDA, Forest Service, conservation groups, ecosystem restoration organizations, that sort of thing. It's a good place to start. And then
How can farmers?
Then they want your email address. Then you got to sign up for the subscription to their stupid newsletter. And it's like, ugh, it's frustrating.
How can farmers assess the current stage of succession on their land?
How do you assess the current stage of succession on your land? Is it bare dirt? Is it grassland? Is it shrubland? That was from my thumbs up, wasn't it? Yeah. Is it shrubland, meaning are shrubs starting to invade it? That's early succession, shrubland. Is it sun-loving trees? Like in around here, it would be mostly oak, and you'd see box elder and elm and ash back when ash was casting seed? Or is it late succession where you'd have shade tolerant trees like beech and basswood and sugar maple? So you just have to figure out which species are represented on your place and say, aha, it's late succession. And here's a great example. If you have a bare black dirt cornfield, don't try to plant a late succession plant like beech or basswood or sugar maple, because it needs that soil to develop for a period of time before that comes in. You'll want to do your mid, early to mid successional plantings in that soil to help the soil, because the soil organisms go through succession as well.
Great. Stefan from Deutschland is asking about plants and trees and bushes to plant in Germany. And maybe the best way to answer this, Mark, would just be, what organizations do you know in continental Europe that are doing this kind of thing that could give him some good advice?
I I have to send them my presentation. I have almost this identical presentation that I just did over in Belgium, Netherlands, and Spain in like the past 3 weeks or so. And so I'm about to send it to two organizations. One is Solid Agro, and the other one is Pomona, Pomona. And they're kind of like they'll be the ones that'll have my presentation I did for Europe. And just so you know, is the oak plant community that I mentioned, the oak savanna plant community type, that's virtually identical over in Europe, except that it's obviously European species, and the same with the pine. It'll be the different, the different specialty regions with, slightly different characteristics, climatic characteristics that'll be slightly different, but the oak and the pine are the same.
Great. Two questions on mushrooms. Do you grow your own spawn? And then also, does the choice of mushroom you grow change for areas the same as trees, or do they have a greater range?
I don't grow my own spawn, not because I can't, but it's just that, those of you who are farming know that we're doing absolutely everything all by ourselves with no money all at once simultaneously. And so that's just another thing that I don't need to hassle with. And so just find a local producer near you. And the one that I get my spawn from is Field and Forest Products in Peshtigo, Wisconsin. One of the things I like about them, they carry a wide range of different types. They also have a lot of descriptions, and they will describe that these are better for hot climates, dry climates. This is from, because they're also bringing in mushrooms from other places, from Europe and Asia and whatnot. And so you'll be able to figure out what the spawn is, what the conditions are, and then you can do some research. Where did it come from? And so then you can do the same with your mushrooms, moving them on.
Okay, great. There's a question about a 200-acre farm in Louisiana. He's wondering about using fire as a management tool for prairie.
Fire is a great management tool in a system like this. And just remember that you will have wanted to have planted fire-tolerant woody species, so that they can tolerate the fires that you're bringing through. The issue in many places around here is that the fire, you'd have to have a wide open area. If you're in any kind of suburban area, forget that fire is out. But think about some of the things that fire does is it removes the organic matter above the ground. So we can do that. We can mow it, in which we can bag and collect all of the organic matter, take it with us. But then it alkalizes the soil, mostly with like a potassium hydroxide. So it makes the soil more alkaline because of all the char that's left behind, and there's some char that's left behind as well. So if we were going to just mow, maybe we would mow, add some biochar, and then add some kind of neutralizing agent, whatever the neutralizing agent most suited for your region is. And that would be one way to proceed.
Great. With your searching for damaged real estate as an investment, what's a good phrase to use to search for that?
Well, online, I just do any online searches and find out where there are properties. And you'll also notice that you don't see a lot of ag land advertised by all these realtors because they're making the most buck on turning houses for people and stuff like buildings and stuff like that. So what I do is I find a region that I like. Now I find some because there'll be some listings for large open land. Then you just find out who the realtor is. You call up the realtor and then you start asking questions. And you ask for degraded land, real piece of crap, the cheapest, the most horrible, ugliest. One of the things, actually, you can look them up online. One of the rad colleagues, Jake Takiff, lives in Colorado. If you look up Jake Takiff, Colorado, restoration agriculture, whatever, there's a really cool YouTube video of him. He's got like 80 acres of high desert Colorado. I think it's only like 8 inches of rain. He has no water rights. No water rights. He put in the water management system and he has the greenest place around. And it took like 4 or 5 years, and then water started to flow kind of further and further into the season. And as of now, he's got like the 6-inch pipe that's gushing water 24/7. He has like 12 or 13 trout ponds. And even the ditch rider, it's because it's a water rights state, and like the state DNR guy, they can't figure out where all the water's coming from. So yeah,
That's cool.
I would look because I was thinking of this property in Montana that it's really reasonable priced. It's like 160 acres. It's ugly as crap. But I don't know if it has water rights or not. So if you have water rights, it's great because then you can go ahead and establish your trees better, have a better chance of them living. But I would want to wean myself and not depend on that, because if the reservoir goes dry, etc., I'd sculpt the land and live with whatever water falls from the sky. Did I successfully avoid answering that question? I don't even know what
I
the
mean, degraded, or like you
yeah.
probably could go into, somehow search for the cheapest dollar value per acre would probably be the other way to do it.
That's one
Um,
way. And talk to the real estate brokers. Yeah.
yeah. When implementing the system on old ag fields and pastures, do you need to put time and effort into preparing the site, like removing unwanted vegetation, like fescue used for haying for 15 years, or can you plant straight into that just to see what thrives?
We'll go ahead and we'll scalp mow the heck out of it and take soil tests, because if it's been in agriculture, the soil minerals have been pushed out of whack. Do a soil test, amend for your major mineral imbalance, but you only have to amend right in the row. Scalp mow it and then rip and plant with the mechanical transplanter like we were talking right there. Now that you've got the tree in the ground and it's alive and surviving, now you spend the rest of your life working on the soil. Most of the time you go online, they say, oh yeah, dig a $40 hole for a $10 tree, do 3 years worth of cover crops, all this compost. It's like, no, put the tree in the ground. Time is the most expensive part of this whole proposition. So put the tree in the ground. Now let's take care of that soil and change it through time for the rest of our lives.
Great. There's a question about managing predators. You talked about putting chickens and things into these systems. Um, I know you mentioned Will Harris and his chickens. I mean, he had a huge problem with bald eagles, right? And somehow he got the government to pay him
He,
to keep these bald eagles, and it was like more profitable than the chickens themselves, right?
he still does. He has a problem. He's losing like 100,000 chickens a year, and they've done everything to prevent it. And my situation here is I can't even raise chickens anymore because of Cooper's hawks. And the Cooper's hawks eat birds. And now that my system's matured, I got birds everywhere, not just chickens. And so you can't stop a Cooper's hawk from eating birds. And now that the habitat is so rich, it's a pain in the butt. So what's really fascinating about this is, as restoration agriculture farmers and ranchers, we are going to learn why our ancestors got rid of certain animals in their systems, because here they are. I would rather have a nice, rich, fully diverse ecosystem and figure out how to outsmart Cooper's hawks than I would rather live in a bare black dirt cornfield with GMOs and malnutrition. I'm not interested in that. I would rather have to figure out how to survive all the different predators. And there's all kinds of tricks. It's been a life-changing experience for me. Is 2 years ago I got a border collie. He was too young a year ago, and he was kind of afraid of livestock and all that. But then this year, it only took a matter of weeks, and pretty soon he's herding cows. By the end of the season, I could just tell him, go get the cows, and he'd go round them up and kind of move them wherever I wanted him to. Um, well, at night, he's on the job full time, and he is chasing stuff all over the place and barking like crazy. So having a good dog is an incredible asset for predator control.
Great. What do you recommend for the dry plains of North America with rainfall not naturally conducive to trees?
I would like that person who just put that question up there say, go out looking. There's trees all over the place. There are trees all over the place. The question is, how much rain do you actually have falling from the sky? Now, the tree types that you want to grow, how much water do they require? Now let's sculpt the land, and I'm putting my hands like this, because if the land is flat and you plant a tree and you only got 6 inches of rain, it's not really going to survive, because it needs 15 inches of rain. But if you go like this and it's like 10 feet and 10 feet, whenever it rains, it comes in and now concentrates in the bottom of the channel. You've now got a concentration of water right there. There's these things, I forgot what the heck they're called, but you make these little pits with wings on it and just drop it down, 2 feet deep or whatever, and then soil and make a mound around it, just to catch a little bit more organic matter blows in there, a little bit more rain concentrates in there. And the biggest thing is snow. In the high plains, snow blows across in the wintertime. It may snow 10 feet, but it's all 3 states over. So now start catching windbreaks and capturing snow in our pits and our mounds. Trees grow just about everywhere, including in the high plains where trees are not everywhere. And let's go back to some of the things I talked at the beginning. If you live in Arizona, you will never make Arizona look like Maine. It's not Maine, it's Arizona. If you live in Montana or the Dakotas, it'll never look like Florida. It's the Dakotas. But you can have a much more productive system if you manage your water and mimic your local plant community types and use the trees, woody shrubs that are adapted to your area, and design an ecological system that way.
Great. Next question. What about dicamba, 2,4-D drift problems? And I mean, I'll bet part of your answer is going to be, it's going to be a lot better in this kind of system than in than a wide open field.
And basically what I have to say is, like, welcome to planet Earth. There's no place that we can go right now to escape from that crap. So we have to figure out how to mitigate as best we can. One of the first things that I did on this farm, because we got enough water to grow, pretty dense tree cover, is I planted hybrid poplar perimeter around the whole entire thing to grow real fast, a visual screen and a spray barrier. And so that if you're going certified organic, you have to have a 25-foot buffer between you and chemically raised crops. And so there's at least 25 feet around the whole entire perimeter of the property that has hybrid poplars. And then I also planted white spruce, black walnut, timber trees, other trees that are thrown in there, just to like take the hit. And there is a section of fence along my north property line that I was actually there. There was like 2 or 3 of us out. We were planting cucumbers in the field that day when the neighbor went by with a sprayer, and the wind was blowing right at us, and we like screamed and hollered, tried to get him to stop. He just ignored us and kept going. And those trees have not even come back yet. And I've replanted over and over again. So I don't know what the hell he was using. So yeah, welcome to planet Earth. We live on a radioactive, chemically contaminated cinder. Get over it. Let's do some ecosystem restoration to mitigate the effects.
Good. So realize the economic value. Are you growing trees out and selling them to a logger to come in and harvest?
The building that I'm sitting in right here, I grew this building. Okay, so there's one. Somebody came in, cut them down, and they cut it in. Then in my clear cut properties that I had, the clear cut properties have had loggers come through twice under my ownership, and we're getting set up to do the next one. That tic-tac-toe board pattern we're talking about, the next chunk is going to get cut maybe this next calendar year, depending on how we can schedule it. So yes, eventually loggers will come in and log it. I use toilet paper. I use wood products. I use regular writing paper. I take responsibility for my paper use, and I want to make sure that I'm planting way more trees than I consume that way. And then,
And then
we're supporting the economy.
And then what about carbon credit systems? I assume you're not involved in any carbon credit systems right now.
Personally, I'm not involved in any carbon credit systems right now. And actually, another thing that I did is I steadfastly refused all government handouts and stuff like that. I wanted to set up a system that pays its own way, and I don't want to have anybody telling me what I can and cannot do with this property, because I'm managing this property as a natural ecosystem, not as a XYZ Chapter 5672 program. Sorry, go away. I'm not interested. So the carbon credits, working with a number of different carbon credits folks, in the week after the Acres Conference, I'll be meeting with some in Ohio. We're going to look at a couple of projects down there. And so, yes, eventually that's who we will be working with. However, in my opinion, as a person who actually farms the land, that's my carbon. I get those carbon credits. If you want to pay me for this carbon credit, no. You pay me for the right for me to trade it, and you can speculate on the value of it, but you don't get that credit. Those credits are mine. And if we're going to use it as a way for somebody else to own the credit that then tells me what I can and cannot do with that resource, they can go wait, I got something in my eye. Hey, excuse me. Sorry. Oh, so yes, we're working with them, but I haven't taken any yet.
Okay, great. And we are at about the hour point, so I think we'll keep answering a couple more questions. For those who are dropping off, thank you for being here. And again, more information at acresusa.com with our magazine, our events, our books, our conference coming up 2 to 5 December in Madison. And then I put into the chat as well, where you can learn more about Mark, his consultant services, his nursery services, his books.
Come to the Acres Conference, the Monday all day. This is a miniaturized version. We'll cover this all day, and we'll cover the finances of the whole thing.
And I mean, Mark's going to be there the whole week, and all of these different people are going to be there. Our speakers. I mean, frankly, you can go on YouTube and see all these presentations from all of the people who are going to be speaking, but the conference is the opportunity to come in person and to ask your specific questions.
And at the beginning of this whole thing, Paul, you asked me what the first conference was or how long I've been going to these Acres conferences. I've been going since I was 10-year-old little boy, and there's no other conference in the world like an Acres USA conference. This is a who's who of the real people who are actually doing this stuff. You can go to these other places and people talk about it or do research about it. This is the place where you go to talk to the folks who they've been in the ring up to their noses in the mud and the muck and the blood for decades. This is the who's who's of regenerative agriculture in this hemisphere, really.
Yep, great. I agree. Thank you. What about turning any of your material into biochar?
Yeah, didn't they hear what I was talking about? Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Great.
Now here's the thing about biochar. Okay, any sparkly object in the regenerative agriculture world is a part of a whole complete system. When we are doing ecological agriculture, we're looking at the whole ecological system, and biochar is part of that system. Making compost is part of that system. The fungi are part of the system. If you all of a sudden say, oh, I'm going to go make this, greenhouse, I'm going to do this because I'm going to make $10 million an acre. Well, you may be doing it without chemicals and you're using compost and stuff, but that's not an ecological system. So biochar, yes, that's an important part of it. Now, if you don't have a resource base of the materials, and if you don't have a reason to go ahead and char that, that's called extra work. Now you're on the input treadmill that you've got to go find the material. You got to have the reactor. You got to make the biochar. You got to crush it up. Now I got to apply it. You just created work. And the input based reductionist thinking this one little thing, biochar, is going to solve everything. That's false thinking. It doesn't work. It's one piece of an overall ecological picture, and it's a valuable piece of that overall ecological picture.
I just decided that I'm going to write one of these opinion pieces one of these days for the magazine about this, about the danger of monocausality, and we can't just rely on one single factor. There's a great de Tocqueville quote that uh, a false but clear and precise idea always has more power in the world than one which is true but complex. I thought that was
Ah,
great.
that's great. It is great. And one of the things when it comes to like the biochar here, if I personally have choices of how I can utilize the surplus wood that I can't turn into saw logs, or I can't, don't use as firewood. Um, I have a choice. I can go ahead and I can chip it on the ground and let it rot right away. And that's more active. It's ramial wood chips. It's a lot more active nutrient flush to my crops. Or I can take it, then I can char it with no oxygen. 90% of the energy that was in there now is released as heat, and it's released as carbon dioxide into the atmosphere to get this char that I then go put on the ground. I've lost so many of the nutrients and I've lost so much of the energy. So I personally choose to chip it and compost it, decompose it in place for the quicker nutrient flush. And yes, it doesn't last 5,000 years. I understand that. I'm making a choice, a complex choice within an ecological system.
Right. A specific question about beech trees, how they're worth comparatively as timber, and do they have mast years or the annual feeding for livestock?
They do have mast years. Their timber is the timber markets you can't really predict. They're very seesaw, and usually how the timber market shifts is based on abundance. This is kind of like the go-to timber for a while, and then it's all gone, so it becomes more valuable. And so that's kind of when beech becomes valuable, is when other stuffs wear out, or some buyer from overseas is buying a ton of it or whatever it is. Now, on the masting characteristic, yes, they do have episodic heavy productive years, and then periods of time with no productivity at all. One of the things I've been working with the University of Maine, and they have yet to really bite and commit to it, is let's start getting hunters out there. And when you are sitting in an area, and if you see these beech trees, let's say that they're thigh high. If you got a beech tree that's thigh high and has nuts on it, let's geotag that and let's get that plant propagated. Now start growing a ton of them in an area. Now let's have them pollinate with one another. Let's develop a highly precocious, that's early to produce, and then a regular bearing, consistent every single year. It wouldn't take too long at all. We've been able to do that in 30 years with chestnuts and hazelnuts. Nuts, not yet with our hickories and butternuts and pine nuts, but with an organization that lasts more than one generation, it wouldn't take, I wouldn't say, more than 50 years to come up with regular producing, early yielding beech nuts.
And final question, what about toxic chemicals that are already in your land? What do you do to mitigate that at the beginning of a project or as you go?
I'll use, well, you do it, you do it both. And then I'll just going to give a Gary Zimmer quote. Biology forgives a ton of sins. And with one of the situations, a personal story, is that uh, I was growing organic produce, especially squash. The Organic Valley Co-op, who I'm a member of, was going to sell to a baby food company. They wanted testing of the product to make sure that there's no organophosphates, which I guess are pesticide residues in the squash. And mine tested hot. So what happens is the squash kind of accumulated that. It goes into the fruit. It's all certified organic. And if I was a chemical producer, I could have been spraying that directly on the fruit, but this was just coming out of the soil. So the squash was scrubbing it out of the soil. I couldn't sell into the baby food market. About 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years in, all of a sudden my squash tested clean. So what happened? We were biologically reactivating things And then as the organic matter, I just recently got my most recent soil test results back. And I've got one particular field over here, 10.5% organic matter. This is insane. It's like
Mm.
forest duff. And it was hard red clay when I got started 28 years ago. So that's what happens. It's all incorporated into that biology. And so it's bound up in other life forms, and it's not getting into this life form.
Yeah, that's great. That's incredible. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark, and for all who've attended. There is going to be a recording of this. We will send out an email that has the link and some other links to, to Mark, where you can learn more about Mark and about Acres USA. Again, just to plug our conference again coming up 2 to 5 December in Madison, Wisconsin, and we'll hope to see you there. Any final words, Mark?
I'm looking forward to seeing as many of you people there as possible.
All right. Me too.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Great afternoon.